Well, good evening and good afternoon. My name is Paul Martin. I am your host for a series of programs across the province looking at a hidden success story in Saskatchewan. That's our export community. It's a little known fact in this province that about 2/3 of all the economic activity in Saskatchewan actually occurs outside the borders of our province. We are the most trade-reliant province and the most trade-successful province in the whole country. More of our activity is predicated on sales to the United States, to Europe, to Asia, to Central and South America than any other jurisdiction in our land. So we, over the course of the next few weeks, are profiling some of the success stories in Saskatchewan's export community, the people in our business community who actually create those linkages that enable us to have a successful economy. One of those people is Peter Adsten. He's a partner and a founder in a firm called Crestline Coach in Saskatoon. Now, you're in the automotive manufacturing business, and I think probably a lot of people don't associate manufacturing of vehicles with Saskatoon.
That's right, Paul. When, if we introduce ourselves and say we work with Crestline and we manufacture ambulances, people's response is always a surprise that ambulances are manufactured in Saskatoon. They assume that they're all manufactured in Detroit or wherever.
But they're not. They're made here in Saskatchewan.
That's right. There's 3 companies in Canada, three major manufacturers in Canada, one in Atlantic Canada and one in Quebec and us in the west here, as well as several smaller distributors. And so we manufacture the ambulances right here, yes.
So walk me through that. Now, when you say you manufacture them, you obviously buy components that are, from automotive makers, and then you custom design and do your own work to meet the customer's needs.
Yes, we buy Ford chassis, usually Ford, sometimes GM, but the industry predominantly wants Ford chassis. And we manufacture an aluminum modular ambulance body on that and upfit the interior of it and install medical equipment and custom build to the requirements of the individual or the city or the government or the country, whatever the case may be.
Now, we're talking about exporting. You people obviously have customers within Canada, within Saskatchewan, I assume, but also really around the world. I mean, how does a company from Saskatchewan in the ambulance business fare in the global scene? I mean, where have you sold to?
We've sold to 23 different countries now. We only began exporting, although we began manufacturing ambulances domestically 25 years ago. We only began exporting 5 years ago, and during that time have sent our vehicles to more than 20 countries. Some of them are only in one ambulance going to one country, and we may never sell another one again, but some of them to Europe, Mexico. Some countries are repeat customers. We'll be buying on an ongoing basis. In fact, we expect strong growth in export sales in Europe in the near future.
So you take a country like Brazil. You've probably sold to them. They've been in the news lately with trade wars and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, how do you penetrate a market like that? And how does a company in Saskatoon get started, find your way in, and then how does the transaction occur?
It's interesting that you mentioned Brazil. That was our very first export. It came to us as a surprise. We've always done a fairly good job of marketing in Canada. And so we figured if you're already producing advertising materials for the Canadian industry, you might as well send it to other countries and see what happens. And that's what we had done. And I guess one of our advertising pieces had gone to a private hospital in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And in that advertising piece, we had a new model at that time, an aerodynamically shaped ambulance. And that customer was at that particular time happened to be looking, they were building a 400-bed expansion to their hospital. This is a private hospital. And they were buying a helicopter, and they were buying 3 new ambulances, and they wanted the three best ambulances they could find in the world. They had been to Germany and looked at their ambulances there and had been to the American market. And I guess our brochure came on the right day, and the contact was made, and to our great surprise, it ended up in a sale of 3 ambulances. And at the time, they turned out to be the most expensive and most elaborate ambulances we had ever built. So that was a real eye-opener for us that there's maybe more potential out there in export markets than we ever dreamt of. And thank goodness that happened many years before the present trade war things that are going on with Brazil now.
But it got you in the door, didn't it? It really got you your start, and it said, boy, the Canadian market is substantial, but how much more substantial could the world be?
It's huge because, large population in many countries, and the types of ambulances they use is different. We sort of can categorize them into the underdeveloped countries or developing countries and the countries that are already developed. And in developing countries, the ambulances are usually very basic. usually just a small little car or a truck or whatever with a red light stuck on the roof and a red cross painted on the side, and that's what their local ambulance is. But even in countries like that, there will be a market for either private hospitals or government organizations or somebody who's got a budget. And all around the world we find when we go visit these countries, we find that people around the world are watching CNN television and watching movies made in the United States, and they assume that because America has the type of ambulances, and we in Canada manufacture the same type as in the United States, they assume that must be the best in the world. That's what they must have. So they strive to purchase those ambulances from us, and a lot of times the customers are delighted when they can buy an American ambulance, what they call an American ambulance, but they can buy it from a Canadian. To them, it's the best of both worlds.
Now, what does this export activity mean to your business, to your company? I mean, how many people do you have working there? You know, what's your sales order book look like? How much is export? How much is domestic?
5% of our sales are in Saskatchewan. 85% of our sales are to other Canadian provinces, and we have some very large contracts that we've just received recently there, and they all happen at the same time. Contract from BC government, Ontario government, City of Toronto, province of Manitoba, as well as a regular domestic, and the part that is not domestic is approximately 10% of our sales. It's not to the United States. Many exporters, their first exporting is to the United States. In our case, it's to other countries, and it's about 10% of our sales is now offshore.
So how big is your operation? How many people do you have working there? How many vehicles would you produce in a year?
There's about 90 people now, and because these contracts we got recently, we'll have to increase that to, I'm not sure what, 110 maybe or whatever. We'll be manufacturing 300 ambulances this next year.
So basically you're pumping out an ambulance a day?
Yes, or per working day, actually a little bit higher than that. Yeah, this is the highest level we've ever been at.
How much do you attribute that to export activity, the fact that, you know, it's sort of the premium, you know, if you work your numbers back, it's what, about 30 units a year or something like that?
The export market it's still only small. It's only 10% of our sales. But it's, I guess we'd call it a fun market, a fun industry, because there's always new and different things learning, depending which country you're dealing with, whether it's freight or currency conversion or insurance or being paid or building specifically for that country. So there's a wide variety of challenges. And what we like best is that usually, not always, but usually the offshore sales have higher margins than we can ever get in domestic Canada. And that, again, that's to our surprise. We would assume it'd be the other way around, but it isn't. There's good margins that we can find.
Okay, you've been an active player in the export community within this province and within our business community. I mean, when you look at exporting and you're talking to others in the business community, what kind of advice do you give them when they say, gee, how can you do that? You know, I mean, you're kind of a non-conventional player. You've already said that in this business, and yet you're able to make it happen.
My advice would be, if they don't know where to start, I'd steer them to the STEP, the Saskatchewan Trade and Export Partnership. We're a member of that organization. It's government funded, but it's industry led. So it sort of operates like a private business, and it helps exporters, those exporters who buy members, or those people who want to begin exporting, who buy a membership, and can get a lot of, they can go on trade missions, still at their own cost, but they go along with trade development officers from STEP. There's a lot of services that they can provide. Somebody a business who is thinking that they should maybe begin exporting, it's a real good starting point to get advice from the STEP personnel. In our own case, we use STEP mainly for market intelligence, and it works really nice if we need the mailing lists or the demographics or whatever we're looking for a certain country. We just request, because we're a member, because we bought a membership, an annual membership, we just give the request to STEP, and a couple of weeks later we get a beautiful report with all the information in it. It didn't cost us a penny extra, and so market intelligence is very important for us.
Do you find Saskatchewan people stand up fairly well when they go on the global scene? Like the standard of doing business here holds up, matches very well to the standards anywhere else?
Absolutely. From the contacts we've had and the trips we've made to different countries, they hold all Canadians, I wouldn't just say Saskatchewan, they hold all Canadians in very high regard. Sometimes I think they think more of us than they maybe even should, but we're They think we're honest people. In the beginning, when we started exporting, we ourselves, the STEP didn't exist at that time. We were worried about payment because we were a small company. For example, we didn't know how letters of credit worked. So we demanded cash in advance, like put the money in our account and we'll build an ambulance for you. And to our surprise, people would do this from different countries, people who had never been to Saskatoon, never met Crestline, we'd never been to their place. They would send us money so that we could build an ambulance for them. Unheard of. They wouldn't do that for many countries in the world, I'm sure, but Canadians, they think we're honest people.
Well, that's very interesting, but that, you know, I think one of the things that probably I hear in the business community and from people at large in the province is, gee, I know we do exporting, but I don't know if I could do that. But what you're saying is probably we're better than we think.
Absolutely, because, well, Saskatchewan being a small population of only 1 million people, as soon as you, if you want to stay in one segment, in one industry, once you've got a dominant share or as big a share as you're going to get in the province, we naturally start selling in other provinces. Well, that's sort of a form of exporting right there, because already we're starting to have to build to different standards or regulations, and from there exporters usually start exporting to the United States because it's same language and a lot of comfort there. My advice, generally speaking, would be if you can do it successfully to satisfy a Saskatchewan need or a Canadian need, then absolutely you can find places in the world where you can do it, sell that product or service in a different country, and not be ashamed to charge a high price, maybe a higher price than you're charging in Canada, and the people will find value in that product or service.
Well, obviously it must work, because if you're sitting here with somewhere between 90 and 110 employees right now, I mean, you'd be one of the more substantial businesses within the province in terms of those numbers. It says it works.
Yes, it does, although a lot of our sales volume is, of course, from other Canadian provinces.
Sure.
But the export right now is only 10%. But we may be optimistic, but we think we're going to see real strong, rapid growth in exports, in offshore sales.
So now that you've got your beachhead out there around the world, you can start to build on that.
Absolutely. Once we're determine how to build prototypes to meet certain standards in a certain country, sometimes that can be a bit of a process till you finally get a product that's right for their market. But then after that, you know, sales seem to come pretty easy. And in Europe, for example, the countries are small and they go to each other's conferences and they see what each other's product are using, and pretty soon you start getting calls and emails and faxes from people you didn't even know existed, but they've seen your product somewhere, maybe in Europe or wherever at a trade show, and are interested in buying.
Peter, thank you very much. My guest has been Peter Adsten. He is one of the founders and a partner in a firm called Crestline Coach in Saskatoon. They manufacture ambulances here in Saskatchewan, and they're selling them across Canada and around the world.